Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I'm excited about my project again. Thank you all for inviting me and for being here, especially Dr. Rita Liberti, and the Center for the Center for Sport and Social Justice. I'm really excited to be here. This is my first time at CSU East Bay, having not spent very much time in California. I'm pretty new. I've only been here since July. But I've already come to find that you have really amazing faculty here that are committed to social justice in all its forms. So you students are really fortunate to be here. I'd like to begin by stating that this is a relatively new research trajectory for me, given that my dissertation focused on epistemologies of the body. And specifically I looked at bodily experiences of maternity in Chicana literature. So that seems very different from what I'm doing now, but the work I did on the body and discourse is very integral to this particular research project. My work then and now, like the work of many academics, comes from lived experience. Like I tell my students, if you don't find what you're looking for, then write about it. So while my dissertation was informed by my experience of having 3 children, this work comes from a lifelong journey with fitness and a struggle with my body and my identity. And throughout the duration of my research, I've changed that language. So what began as a study of Latina's pursuits of fitness has become rearticulated as a journey with fitness, because pursuit suggests that it might never be attained, when in fact our fitness needs are shifting all the time. So over the past few decades, we've seen many shifts in how fitness looks and what experts believe is the best way to achieve a fit body. And I've tried many of these methods, including but not limited to buns of steel, Denise Austin's aerobics, Billy Blank's kickboxing, spin classes, body pump, Bikram yoga, circuit training, Azteca dancing, interval training, and yes, I even once owned a Thigh Master. So that might kind of give you an indication of when I was born. I wanted the long, lean body promised by Pilates, the firm rear end promised by weight training, and the whittled waist promised by Denise Austin. But eventually, I wanted the muscular figure achieved by intense weight sessions at my local gym, yearning after the feeling of empowerment and strength and control that came from exercise. But I came to find that too many times I was often the only woman in the weights area, especially the only woman of color. From my loneliness came a desire to want to understand what discourages women, especially Latinas, from working out, especially in the male-dominated spaces of the gym. But that's not my major research question, because I don't want to create a hierarchy in which gym exercise is the most privileged form of exercise, but it did help me to generate other questions and other lines of inquiry. And I do want to add that my mother's experiences with eating and exercise disorders, and eventually my own experiences with disordered eating and exercise, also inform my work. So before I get into the meat of my presentation, I want to point out that it's important to recognize that there are parameters to discussions about size, fitness, and health, and even sport, because those are all different conversations, though we tend to conflate them. Of course, there are real points of intersection that are valid and that need to be discussed, but just as important as identifying the intersections is the need to recognize the boundaries. And in my work, I bring in all 3, size, fitness, and health, into conversation, but without using them interchangeably or conflating them. I've also found the subfield of fat studies and size studies to be helpful, because they've really helped to push the boundaries of health studies by unlinking health and size and more firmly establishing those boundaries. Size studies actually quite nicely merges health studies and women's studies, particularly by exposing the constructedness of obesity and health, as well as the heterosexist, capitalist, and racial underpinnings of size ideals. Like women's studies, social justice is at the core of size studies, which recognizes fat discrimination as one of the last socially accepted forms of discrimination. So fat studies is one part of the foundation on which I situate my work, which is in the emerging field of feminist fitness studies. Unlike traditional directions in health studies that seek to address and solve health epidemics, largely because of my training in literature, I'm more interested in language and visual discourse and how they both reflect and frame neoliberal rhetorics of healthism and fitism. This also helped me avoid being a disciplinary voyeur in health studies, because I'm approaching these topics through a lens of language, cultural, and feminist studies. That was my little intro to it, but now I'm going to get into the meat of my talk. Recently, several mainstream news outlets, such as the Huffington Post, ran stories on a Fitspirational poster that had gone viral. Wearing a sports bra surrounded by her 3 young toddlers, the lean and muscular California mother in the picture, Maria Kong, asks her audience, "What's your excuse?" The responses to the poster range from calling the mother an inspiration to labeling her a bully. News commentators declared that the mommy wars had been resurrected, and that the root of the intense backlash was society's sense of entitlement and general laziness. For example, Kathy Lee Gifford stated, "I think because we live in an entitled world, we want what she has, but we don't want to work to get it." Kong herself declared that the controversy could be characterized by 3 issues, and these are her words. 1, there's an accountability issue. There's a lot of people with a lot of excuses. Number 2, there's an entitlement issue. People don't want to hear that it takes discipline, consistency, and hard work to achieve a goal anymore. 3, there's a body shaming issue of her body. Here, Kong engages in what Robert Crawford refers to the neoliberal ideology and practice of healthism, which situates the problem of health and disease at the level of the individual and where the lack of health is associated with moral laxity. However, I suggest that the concept of fitism might be a more appropriate explanation of Kong. The concept of fitism has only been used very loosely by the blogosphere to describe a lifestyle dedicated to fitness. However, as I use it here, fitism not only adheres to healthism ideology, but also promotes a tyranny of aesthetics, which is supported and cultivated by mainstream publications, internalized cultural social norms, consumer culture, the medicalization of fatness and thinness, and the pharmaceutical supplement industrial complex. The discourses of healthism and fitism, as well as notions of acceptable performances of gender, sexuality, race, and ethnicity, produce what Sherry Dworkin and Faye Linda Walks refer to as body panic, individualized feelings about the body produced through multiple processes of meaning-making that simultaneously displace critiques of social structure onto individual body failures while stigmatizing those who fail to participate and succeed in the existing system. The anxieties of body panic, they further explain, marshal resources to a morally valued but socially depoliticized project, the endless quest for bodily perfection. And these resources can and do include the myriad supplements, fitness gadgets, meal programs, smartphone apps, online support groups, office weight loss competitions, and many more that are continuously improved upon, made more convenient, and made more desirable. Because the project for bodily perfection is conflated with and often mobilized by the moral imperative to achieve supreme health, participating in this consumer culture, which is fueled by what Dworkin and Walks refer to as a culture of lack, becomes necessary, evidence of one's effort to take full advantage of the products to which we are believed to all have access. As Crawford points out, body shape or aesthetics has come to be a corporeal metaphor for health, an indicator of not only what is medico-scientifically good, but also morally good. So no longer is good health an adequate qualifier of morality. Now an easily discerned fit look is just as important. Which kind of speaks to those core questions the Center for Sport and Social Justice posed about what does it mean to have a fit body, what does that look like? How then might this quest for medical and moral good become complicated by competing ideologies of beauty and health and perceptions of bodies of color? How and to what extent do the built environment, capitalism, labor, and histories of racial and economic segregation create colonial conditions that directly impact food choice, health, and efforts to pursue fit bodies? And so in my work, I look specifically at Latina bodies, which I sometimes refer to as brown bodies, which Luz Galvo explains in their work, does not reify brown skin as authentic to Chicano o Latino o identity, but refers to a position within a social symbolic order constructed through language and fantasy. I argue that body panic is produced through the conflict of hegemonic representations of fit white bodies and sexualized archetypal Latina bodies in the media. This panic is also exacerbated by the limited resources in low SES neighborhoods characterized by food insecurity and unsafe and unwalkable spaces for exercise. Most of this presentation is focused on working through the competing discourses and online representations of Latina bodies and fit bodies, and then I bring in some of my initial environmental observations that I've made in my early research in San Antonio, Texas, which is the most economically segregated city in the US. I consider how even government-supported fitness programs support healthism and fitism, namely by encouraging organized exercise activities that are not appropriate for high-crime neighborhoods. So to these ends, I situate my work alongside Dworkin and Walks, who argue that the focus on personal responsibility within mainstream fitness operates to promote neoliberal ideologies that obscure the impacts of government and structural contributions to health disparities. Understanding ideologies behind representations of Latinas in mainstream media helps to complicate neoliberal concepts of choice and personal responsibility within fitness. So for Latinos, the internet is an increasingly powerful tool through which they can access representations of themselves. Dworkin and Walks explain that contemporary media produce body panic not only through idealized imagery that invokes individualized feelings about the body, but also through a process of what is included as content inside of media text and representation, and what is, by extension, left out. So by conducting Google image searches, we can identify what is included and discern what is left out of the online master narrative by what appears or doesn't appear before us. In her work on Latinas in the media, Isabel Molina Guzman emphasizes the significance of the mainstream media's construction of Latinidad to affirming traditional notions of the U.S. as a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant nation by setting up Latina identity and culture as inherently exotic, foreign, and consumable. Building upon Foucault's docile bodies, Molina Guzman argues that the media has symbolically colonized Latinas through the excessive circulation of archetypes that reify constructions of Latinas as submissive, irrational, hypersexual, and maternal. And so I turned to Google image searches because they act as a sort of archive for hegemonic and master representations of whatever it is that you're looking for. They also have the potential to shape how searchers come to define identities based on their top search results. And so here you see a phenotype, right? So it's just a basic search for Latinas. You see a phenotype that we as a society typically associate with Latina identity. Curvy bodies, right, brown hair, sultry facial expressions, tan skin, cleavage, right? You see the similarities, right, the commonalities. Their larger behinds and fuller breasts are in excess of a more European idea of beauty, which privileges thinness, blonde hair, more narrow features. This Google search of Latinas exemplifies Molina Guzman's assessment of brown women in the media as inherently exotic, foreign, and consumable, and threatening to the nation state. Native American studies scholars such as Andrea Smith and others who trace histories and rates of Native American and Black slave girls and women reveal that brownness and Blackness historically have been associated with ideas of sexual impurity. The panic over the imagined flooding of the U.S. by Central and Latin American immigrants and their anchor babies also reflects the threat of brown Mexican female bodies to sovereignty, national identity, economic security, and sexual morality. Looking at this Urban Dictionary definition of breeder, you can see that Mexican mothers, the biggest perceived threat, right, are not only characterized by nationality and class, but also by size. So you can see that this person, Tony, in Urban Dictionary, defines breeder as an alternate name for the stereotypical overweight Mexican woman that meets one or more of the requirements. Excessive amount of undisciplined children, does not speak English, on welfare, usually very hairy and outright hideous. And their sample sentence is, "Oh God, I hate Walmart. There's breeders everywhere and I keep tripping over their kids that are trying to sell me chicles." So it's this very objectified, right, definition of a breeder. Right? And so this is actually something that I look at in my dissertation, and I use several definitions from Urban Dictionary because they reflect the unofficial discourse, right, around these terms, which is very important to consider, right, aside from the official discourse. So if within this logic, the signifiers of the brown woman symbolize her threat to sovereignty, to security, to purity, to what extent is she capable of fulfilling the imperative for moral goodness? So to work towards an answer, we need to know what a fit body looks like in the media. Right. So I just Googled fit woman. A Google search reveals that the typical fit woman has defined muscular contouring. She lifts heavy weights, which I've noticed as I've done these searches that the size of the weights has changed. You still see like the smaller dumbbells, but you're more likely to see the larger, maybe 15-pound dumbbells, right, that they're carrying. She is sexually appealing and is white as well. Very telling is a picture of the blonde woman with a muscular yet traditionally feminine shape and features, wearing a crop shirt that reads, "Strong is the new skinny," a phrase that has been hailed by the feminine empower movement and harshly critiqued by feminists. If, as Susan Bordeaux describes, anorexia is one of the logical of extreme manifestations of anxieties and fantasies fostered by our culture, in that the slender fit body is a symbol of virile mastery over bodily desires that are threatening to overtake the self, is this hyper-fit and muscular body a celebration of the female body reclaimed, a mastery of the body that insists on presence rather than absence, or a manifestation of anxieties and fantasies in another form? And these are the questions that I'm currently working through. So now that we've looked at the visual discursive constructions of Latina and fit bodies on the internet, let's go to Latina publications to further examine how Latinas participate in their own construction of brown bodies. And so I picked these as being representative of many covers that show pretty contradictory messages. I'm not a fan of Latina magazines, probably why they stopped sending me my free subscription, because I started writing about them. But here, I want to use these two to point out a couple of things. So this is America Ferrera, right? Many of you are familiar with her. One thing that my students like to point out is that this is her after a pretty major weight loss. And here you have, America the Beautiful, Curvy, Proud, and Changing Hollywood. And then you come around here, how to dress your Latina body, right? Tricks, secrets, and the most flattering clothes, which suggests, many things, right? That there is a Latina body and that it's kind of a mystery because you need tricks and secrets in order to dress it. And then you come up here to the top, and this is kind of a nod to that scene in Real Women Have Curves, if you've seen it, where she's sitting with her mother, and her mother is saying, don't eat the flan, right? Because she wants her to look attractive, and she's imposing these very patriarchal, heterosexist ideas on her. And she eats the flan, right, as an act of resistance. So here you have the best flan in America, but underneath you have the miracle food that'll help you lose weight. So, can you have your flan and eat it too? Not according to Latina magazine, right? Then you have over here Judy Reyes on the cover, and you have perfect pants for curves, right? Butt lifters, pooch hiders, hip enhancers, all inside. And so, you can have a butt, but it has to be lifted. You can have hips, but they have to be enhanced. And so it's kind of like working through this concept of controlled excess, right? Where you can be an excess of an ideal, right, European body, but it still has to be controlled in a particular way. And then up here you have, Latin food to help you lose weight, and the drink that melts away pounds. And so, this is representative of some of the many, many contradictory messages that Latina magazine sends out. So it makes sense then that Latina magazine's current fitness correspondent is Evelyn Lozada, an Afro-Latina that is best known for her role on the reality show Basketball Wives. Photographed in seductive poses wearing outfits that emphasize her curvy shape, Lozada is a multiracial other through which a fit Latina body is made possible. Here, Latina magazine has mapped onto the material body of Lozada the identity which, Judith Butler might say, has been repudiated by the magazine. Latina magazine founder Chrissy Hawbegger's piece in Essence magazine in 1993, entitled "I'm Not Fat, I'm Latina," further speaks to the repudiation and disavowal of the hegemonic fit body as one that is anything but Latina. She writes, "Latinas in this country live in two worlds." This is the article. Latinas in this body live in two worlds. People who don't know us may think we're fat. At home, we're called bien cuidadas, or well cared for. She speaks of not fitting in at school, but fitting right in with her Latino community, where she was desired by Latino boys and spent all night dancing on the salsa floor while her skinnier friends lined the walls. Her turning point about her body, as she calls it, came during a trip to Mexico, where she read the wide door frames as evidence of a cultural history of fatness. She critiques articles that focus on the dangers of Latina women's cultural acceptance of their bodies, and counters with the argument that their bodies are not dangerous but are well taken care of. She ends by writing, "Our community has always been accepting of us well cared for women, so why don't we feel beautiful? You only have to flip through a magazine or watch a movie to realize that beautiful for most of this country still means tall, blonde, and underfed. But we know it's the magazines that are wrong. I, for one, am going to do what I can to make sure that mis hijas, my daughters, won't feel the way I did." So though these covers and article clearly celebrate curvy Latinas, recently Latina magazine, Hallbegger's magazine, has begun questioning these images. In an article titled, "Are Your Latina Curves Killing You?" Irina Gonzalez writes, "1 in 4 of us is actually overweight and not taking any precautions. In fact, I would bet that many more of us don't even know the risks we're putting ourselves through by embracing our full figure and curves." And notice the different competing messages here. If you look at the advertisements, right, you have the egg breakfast taco, right, ad, and then the fitness band at the bottom. So it's expected. Here, those same curves that signified a threat to U.S. identity and morality now signal a threat to one's existence. Gonzalez has suggested that embracing one's curves and not taking any precautions has led to increased risk of disease, reappropriates the neoliberalist rhetoric of healthism that situates the problem at the level of the individual while ignoring the competing value systems, the structures of social inequality, and the industrial food complex that work to create unfit, unhealthy, quote-unquote, bodies. Right? These failed brown bodies, coupled with former U.S. Surgeon General Everett Koop's statement that obesity is a greater threat to the U.S. than terrorists, further position fat and curvy Latinas as failed citizens and even as terroristic. Further, the health warning associated with Latinas' killer curves effectively exposes the limitations and pitfalls of the feminist body positive movement, a movement that itself fails to address the complex negotiations in which Latinas must engage to love their bodies. What does it mean to Latina magazine, to the Latina magazine readership, that for years Latina magazine has encouraged them to embrace their curves, their bodily otherness, but is now suggesting that their love of their bodies is leading to their own demise? How then are Latinas to reconcile the cultural valoration of curvy hips, full bottoms, soft arms and bellies, and full chests with the threat that these features pose to their health and the nation and the hegemony of the fit, white, muscular body? It is clear through media analyses and my readings of health body narratives that Latinas experience body panic in ways that are complicated by the panopticism of health that includes competing beliefs about femininity, culture, beauty, fitness, and health. So through this analysis of imagery and discourse, I'm setting up a project in which I take these constructions of bodies and consider how Latina journeys of fitness may be further constrained by the colonial conditions of an urban space. And for now, I'm going to shift gears a little bit to share some of my initial observations of environment and the ways in which environment works with media and all these messages to constrain fitness. Because this, okay, never mind. So my question is, how and to what extent does environment produce and intensify body panic? Okay. So my primary research site is San Antonio, Texas, a city once bestowed with the title of America's fattest city. San Antonio, according to a 2010 census, is over 60% Latino, the majority of which are of Mexican descent. Once Mexican land, San Antonio was the epicenter of 16th to 18th century colonial Mexico, and even after having become U.S. land, is a highly transnational city, one of the top 3 destinations for immigrants from the Latin Americas. Another title that San Antonio holds is that of America's most economically segregated city. The study that published these findings produced maps of San Antonio that clearly distinguish the lines and streets of separation between income brackets. However, what they do not show you are the corresponding relationships between socioeconomic status, or SES, and grocery stores, gyms, safety, and race and ethnicity. Though San Antonio currently has a rising Latino middle class, certain areas of town remain largely Latino and poor. And so I focus most of my observations on the historic west side of San Antonio, which is primarily Mexican-American or Chicano, and its residents are heavily affected by diabetes and cardiovascular disease. The connections between cardiovascular health, poverty, and diet allow us to make critiques of structural inequalities and their consequent cultural erasure. In Decolonize Your Diet, a manifesto, Catriona Esquivel and Luz Calvo call on Chicanos to reclaim indigenous foodways to restore health as well as relationships with the earth and ancestral knowledge. Issuing a call for food sovereignty, the authors note the destructive effects of capitalism and globalization on U.S. diets, as well as the colonial technologies of grocery stores. They describe decolonization as the ongoing process to end oppression and servitude and to restore respect for indigenous knowledge and ways of life. And in one strand of my work, I'm considering how grocery stores colonize diets through product availability, value meal deals, and use of influential technologies to influence and control food choice and consumption. And so through lenses of visual anthropology and marketing psychology, I examined the appeal of the layout of the produce section, appeal of the actual produce, use of technologies to draw attention to certain products. And one of these is, some of these technologies have unintended consequences of being influential. So there is, in one grocery store, which is on the west side, the beer cases or freezers have light sensors, and so they won't light up, and it's to save energy, right? So they won't light up unless you're walking by it. And so when you walk by it, your eye keeps, looking over to the freezers because it catches your attention. So they have these unintended effects of being influential. I also look at, choice of beverages and food items in the end coolers and by the cash registers, availability of organic foods and non-conventional food items such as soy and non-dairy products, and also availability of bilingual information to explain uncommon food items. So those are just a few of the ones. And so in my observation so far, I found that low SES neighborhoods are significantly more disadvantaged when it comes to food choice and quality, and that product placement in these neighborhoods is highly predatory, exploiting the vulnerabilities of low SES neighborhood residents, including their lack of education about food, the need for quick, calorie-dense foods to feed large families, child-related stressors that lead to impulse buys, which I'm guilty of doing, and even alcoholism. And speaking of predatory, these areas are also, they also have some of the highest concentrations of predatory lenders as well in these neighborhoods. So end coolers, like if you were to look at those, we don't think too much about them, but they say a lot about what they expect, people to buy. The end coolers in these neighborhoods feature beer and soda. And if you go to the other side of town, which with higher income neighborhoods, they feature organic tea and sparkling water. So very, very big difference. And the organic produce just varies widely across. The historic West Side has also come to be known for its high crime rates. Zarzamora Street is known for its sex workers, and women who use Zarzamora for bus travel are often harassed. Further, this area is also known for having high numbers of stray animals, which can hinder mobility and activities such as jogging, which I came to find out since I lived on that side of town and I was chased by dogs a lot of times. For West Side women, articles in magazines that suggest that readers just strap on their shoes, put your baby in a jogging stroller, and take a walk around your neighborhood after work invisibilize the environmental realities of their neighborhood, as well as make class assumptions about labor, time, and resources. Thus, these issues make it difficult for West Side women to participate fully in city fitness initiative programs such as San Antonio Walks, which trains residents to lead their neighbors in walking groups around their neighborhoods. In her work on female bodybuilders, Leslie Haywood explains that the sovereignty inherent in bodybuilding and other forms of exercise recuperates to be looked at-ness. For women who feel hypervisible in spaces with high rates of street harassment and even sexual assault, organized exercise, a performance and public exhibition in many ways, can magnify those feelings of hypervisibility, of to be looked at-ness, and reify their bodies as public spectacles and subjects of surveillance. At the same time, these hypervisible bodies are invisible within mainstream representations of fit and healthy bodies. Chicana theorist Glorence Aldua speaks of this paradox when she explains her existence as an Indian woman. She writes, I am invisible, yet I am visible, yet I am invisible. I both blind them with my beaked nose and am their blind spot. So that's Glorence Aldua. And so now I want to bring, because I've talked about several things, but I want to bring it around full circle. So I started out by discussing how Latina identity and fit identities are visually and discursively colonized, and then moved toward how capitalism and environment contribute to this colonization. So to begin imagining other ways of bodily being, the work of Chicana feminist theorist Gloria Anzaldúa, author of Borderlands, La Frontera, the New Mestiza, who died an untimely death due to diabetes complications, is critical as I work through the collisions of representation and reality in Latinas' health and fitness journeys. As Anzaldúa describes, the porous borders of the borderlands and mestizaje challenge the nation-state's desires for rigid boundaries of race, sexuality, and citizenship. The symbolic colonization of Latinas' bodies in the media seeks to contain these identities and promote European bodies as bodies fit for citizenship. Thus, the mestiza struggle, described by Anzaldúa as a struggle of flesh, a struggle of borders, and inner war, is ideological and embodied, as she attempts to make sense of the competing internalized ideologies, her desire for health sovereignty, and the conditions of her environment. When Anzaldúa speaks of healing from diabetes, she insists that mestizas must believe that they can effect healing in their bodies, that they must not give in to external authoritative figures. Though she is speaking specifically to the experiences of overcoming disease, she envisions the body of the mestiza to be a site of individual self-determination, where overall health and physical fitness is determined not by the panopticon of healthism, but by a multidimensional notion of well-being. Anzaldúa's articulation of La Mestiza as an identity that sustains contradictions and becomes something else can provide a paradigm for self-determination through which the mestiza and other Latinas can confront and reconcile the struggles of their identities and, as Anzaldúa says, work toward wholeness. Many Chicanas and Latinas' inabilities to become whole, to, as Susan Bordo says, go beyond the dualisms, are not only inner struggles, but manifest in the forms of depression and suicide. In fact, young Latinas attempt suicide more than any other youth demographic. In her interview with Ana Luis Keating, Anzaldúa explains that the body has played a significant part in the shaping of her identity, asserting that her resistance to racial and gender injustice stemmed from her physical differences. Here she is speaking specifically about her experiences with disease and menstruation as an infant, but read within the larger context of her work, she can also be alluding to her differences as a marked racial and lesbian other. Here then, Anzaldúa is revealing the epistemological implications of these othered bodies. What can non-normative, socially and physically deviant bodies know? What forms of resistance are generated by brown fat bodies, for example, that expose and push the boundaries of the good, fit, healthy body? Anzaldúa's work on mestizaje and mestiza consciousness helps Latinas to take inventory of the messages they have internalized about their bodies and to recognize how their environmental and class conditions complicate their journeys of health and fitness. Ultimately, mestiza consciousness can facilitate the growth of conocimiento, a consciousness that Anzaldúa describes as counter-knowledge, which produces different versions of reality. In short, decolonial knowledge through which Latinas can articulate and embody more liberating forms of bodily being. So I'm going to end on an optimistic note by acknowledging the movements that are taking place now to reclaim fat and differently sized bodies as bodies of fitness, especially through the reclamation of yoga. And I think this is where more of that work is being done. Some include the decolonizing yoga movement that has challenged class and racialized history and marketing of yoga in the U.S. People's Yoga, which recently had a fundraiser to raise money to build a community yoga studio on the east side of LA, and Chicana fat activists such as Leanne Hidalgo of Big Girls Code, whose renaming of yoga to Raspache Yoga reimagines the practice as something that can be done by anyone with any clothes, Lululemon pants not required. Through these rearticulations of yoga, women of color especially are claiming the right to take up space and to be autonomous over their bodies. And to end, so I'm sure many of you are familiar with this quote. To end, I quote Audre Lorde, who reminds us that to take care of myself is not self-indulgence, it is an act of political warfare. Thus, Chicanas and Latinas and all women and men must continue to expose structural inequalities and resist the tyranny of fitness that limits possibilities for imagining themselves as fit beings. Thank you. Okay. There are a lot of you here. Any questions? We have a question. Yes.
I really enjoyed your talk, so thank you. Very stimulating. I was thinking maybe, I've been following Latina magazine on Facebook, so how they post their, and it's like a guilty pleasure when you push the, like I just am, even though I keep on saying I'm not going to follow them anymore, I keep on pushing on their little links. And so I was wondering if you could just maybe expand on what the work, what is it, who's following them, and what is the cultural work that Latina magazine is doing? Just a little bit more on that.
Yeah, and I think, Latina magazine is really trying to offer this reflection, right, of Latinas, but in some ways, it's they're as much as a part of that construction, right? And so I feel they're doing more work to construct images rather than to reflect realities. But a lot of what they put out is relatable, to many people, and I think especially to much of their readership who follows them because of that. But it doesn't reflect the diversity of Latina identities, right, and experiences at all. It seems as if they're making the assumption that every Latina is like a first or second generation immigrant. That's kind of what I've gotten from their posts. And so I've noticed more people are starting to come out and say, well, I don't identify with this. And, well, does that not make me Latina? And so, while they're trying to construct this kind of collective identity, in the process, they also leave people out of that as well. But it is a space, and in mainstream media, and there are a couple of things that they've done recently that I've been happy with, like their top 10 activists, which I was glad that it was not mostly celebrities. I think it was one or two. So I think there are people who have infiltrated Latina magazine that are trying to do more of that progressive work. But still, there's this struggle because they have to appeal to the masses, right, and appeal to what our expectations are and our perceived, value systems. And
very celebrity.
it is, yeah, exactly. I had a conversation with a friend how I never, as a teenager, I loved it, but I thought that what success meant was to be a celebrity. So it very much colonized that idea of success and being a Latina success story. And so, it was rare to see academics on there, and more are being included. But that's kind of my dream, to have a magazine. It always has been Latina academic. I don't know, something like that. Uh-huh.
our course, and so I'm just wondering if you thought about that at all, or what.
Yeah, I used to watch it when it first started, and really because of time issues, I haven't really kept up with it. But this last one was pretty interesting, and there was an article I read how we see this woman, right, the one who won, as kind of a failure, but she actually did exactly what the show set out to do. So the one who got really, really thin, yeah. She was medically underweight. I think she was 105 from close to 300, right, 280 or something like that. Yeah. So that's important, to bring in. Because that's part of the public discourse, right, on health and size and fitness. It's not a very positive representation at all, but its influence has really, affected people and their own perceptions of fitness. So it's important to look at it, right, and to talk about it, but I try to do it without promoting it. So I try not to watch it, but I like to read. I don't know if any of you keep up with the blog Fit and Feminist. It's pretty good. Caitlin Constantine, and she has really smart critiques of these things in pop culture. So there are people who are doing. There's another one, Fit Feminist in 50, something like that. She does really smart critiques as well. So these conversations are happening, and they're happening in public ways. But when it comes down to it, these shows bring in a viewership, right? That would bring in the advertising money, and yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, yeah, that would be interesting to consider. That's definitely something that I should consider at some point. And for the most part, it's very U.S. centric. My work. I'm sure there is I'm positive there is a readership outside of the U.S. But I haven't really done any work on that. I would imagine some would feel pretty insulted by some of the articles that are put out about Mexico and Mexican culture, right? Because we have commodified that culture in so many ways, to the point where it's just these things are just like these just signifiers of Mexicanness and Mexicanidad. I I I haven't really done as much research as I would have liked, looking at Latinas or looking at like Mexicanas, in Mexico, and body image. But there is a very strong influence of Western ideals, body ideals in Mexico, and so that would be interesting to bring in. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I wanted to ask, so for young Latinas that are committing suicide, are they resorting to that because of this double consciousness or this distorted media or this lack of accessible knowledge of taking ownership of who they are? Or what exactly is it that are causing young Latinas to suicide?
Well, I think if they had more mestiza consciousness, then it would help them reconcile those feelings of fragmentation, of feeling split, right, and feeling at war with themselves. I mean, there are many issues that go into this, but part of it is dealing with these two pretty conflicting cultures that are, that have, when it comes to certain things, different value systems that prioritize and idealize different, bodies and different looks and different things, and having to navigate those. And especially, I think the highest demographic was like second generation, I think, Mexican Americans, which, you know, there's work on immigration and the immigrant paradox, right? That those, Latin American immigrants and Mexican immigrants, the second generation tends to fare a lot worse, whereas European immigrants, their second generation tends to fare a lot better. And a lot has to do with the fact that we still have very, very colonial spaces, very colonized spaces here, and so they're and the racism is very historical, and so and very embedded, entrenched in the nation. So they're dealing with all of that, and feeling torn apart, and then is there enough outreach, right? Are there enough resources out there? So many things, right? They're serving as, some of them are translators for the parents, are dealing with, deported parents. I mean, just all kinds of things. So it's very, very, it's complex and, very complicated, but, these issues are, part of that larger conversation about, Latina suicide.